Have you ever felt like you're living a life that just happened? Not because you chose it, but because you walked into it step by step without noticing when the decision was actually made. What if you never stopped to notice when this began? I'm not talking about fate or determinism. I'm talking about something far more uncomfortable. Most of what you think, feel, and want was shaped before you had the capacity to question anything. Some ideas didn't originate in you. Some fears aren't yours. Some goals were never actually chosen. Thoth observed a pattern that spans generations. What we call self is usually an inherited construction. And the question almost nobody dares to ask is this: if you stripped away everything that was placed into you, what would actually remain? If you've ever felt like you were just following a script inside your own body, that's not coincidence. Picture a 4-year-old child sitting at a table. Someone says, "Boys don't cry." The child doesn't understand gender theory, doesn't know what emotional repression means. The child only knows that something inside was just classified as wrong. And in that moment, without words, without ceremony, a part of the child gets archived, stored away, forgotten. But it doesn't disappear. It becomes an internal rule that will operate for the next 50 years, without anyone needing to repeat the phrase. Because now it's automatic. You have rules like this. Everyone does. Unwritten. Unchosen, just installed. Think about the first time someone told you what was right. You had no reference point to disagree, no mental framework to compare. You simply accepted it. And that became part of what you call my opinion. But was it yours? Or was it just the first version that reached you before any other could compete? Here's something nobody told you. The human brain doesn't distinguish between what I think and what I heard first. If an idea arrives early enough, it becomes part of your mental architecture. Not a belief, a structure, and you don't question structures, you build on top of them. Until one day, decades later, you realize the foundation was crooked from the beginning, and everything you built on top is crooked too. Thoth mapped this as the principle of correspondence. As without, so within. The world around you isn't just the scenery of your life, it's the mold of your mind. Every voice that told you what love was, every gesture that showed you what strength looked like, every silence that taught you what couldn't be said, all of it entered, and you called it me. But here's the problem. You didn't choose the mold. You were born inside it. Pause for a second. Think about the last important decision you made. Now be brutally honest. Did you decide, or did you just confirm something that had been pushed for years? Did you choose your career, or did you choose the career that made sense within the value system installed in you? Did you choose how to love, or did you learn to love in the way that people watched you love and approved? The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Because if you never examined the criteria of choice, you didn't choose. You just obeyed an internal algorithm someone else programmed. Most people spend their entire lives defending ideas they never examined, not because they're true, but because they're old. And the human brain confuses age with truth. If something has been there long enough, it assumes it must be right, must be important, must be yours. But what if it isn't? Here's a simple thought experiment. Think of 3 values you consider fundamental. Note them mentally. Now ask, who taught me this? When was the first time I heard this idea? Was I old enough to disagree? Did I have enough information to compare? Or did I simply absorb it? The answer, in most cases, is embarrassing, because you realize you defended it for decades without ever really investigating if it made sense for you. You just repeated it, like a mantra, like a prayer, like a password to be accepted by the group that raised you. There's a strange moment that happens when you start paying attention. You notice you respond to things before thinking. You feel emotions that don't seem proportional to what's happening. You act in ways that, afterward, you can't really explain. And when you try to trace where it came from, you can't find a clear point of origin. Just a feeling that it's always been this way. But always. Or since someone decided it was this way for you. Let me give you a concrete example. Someone criticizes you. Before you even process the content of the criticism, something inside you already reacted. Anger, shame, immediate defense. Where did that come from? You didn't choose to feel that way. You didn't even have time to think, I'm going to get angry now. The anger just appeared. Automatic, instantaneous, as if someone pressed a button, and the truth is, someone did press it, just not now, a long time ago, when you learned that being criticized was dangerous, when you associated disapproval with rejection, when you decided wordlessly that you couldn't fail. And since then, that button has been there, waiting, ready to be triggered by anything that remotely resembles that old feeling. Thoth pointed to something ancient traditions repeat in different forms. The mind isn't born complete, it's shaped, and those who shape it often aren't conscious of what they're doing. Your parents taught you how to love in the way they learned to love, which might not have been good, but it was all they knew. Your teachers taught you how to think in the way they learned to think, which might have been limited, but it was what they had. And you absorbed all of it without a filter, because you didn't have a filter. You were a conscious sponge in a world that didn't know it was programming you. Think about it differently. Have you ever seen a child imitate a parent's walk? The child doesn't decide to do it. They simply absorb the pattern. And years later they walk exactly that way, without ever having learned it. Now extend that to everything: how you handle conflict, how you express affection, how you react to failure, how you celebrate victory. None of this was consciously chosen. It was absorbed. Emotional osmosis, and you called it personality. But here's the part that hurts. If your parents didn't know how to handle fear, how could you have learned? If they avoided vulnerability, how would you develop emotional courage? If they never questioned their own beliefs, how would you learn to question yours? The answer is you didn't learn. You inherited the same void and spent decades trying to fill it with information, with achievements, with external validation. But the void remains, because it's not a lack of something. It's the presence of an unexamined pattern. And here's the part almost nobody wants to face. If you didn't choose your fundamental values, do you really have values? Or do you have echoes, reflections of other people living through you without you noticing? Be honest now. How many times have you defended an opinion in public and later alone realized you weren't sure you believed it? How many times have you felt obligated to maintain a posture because it's always been that way? How many times did you agree with something just to avoid conflict and it became part of your identity without you noticing? This isn't hypocrisy. It's something more subtle. It's active inheritance. You're not lying. You're operating a system that was installed before you knew systems could be questioned. There's an ancient word for this. The Greeks called it katabasis, the descent, the journey to the underworld. Not a physical place, but the place inside you where things you didn't choose still command. And the descent begins with a simple question. Why do I believe this? Not the ready answer. The answer you automatically repeat, but the real origin. Who told you first? In what context? Did you have another option at that moment? Imagine every belief you have is a house. You live in it, you defend it, you invite people to visit it, but you never looked at the foundation, never checked if it was built on solid ground or quicksand. And when you finally descend, when you dig, you discover something disturbing. Most of your mental houses are built on foundations other people poured, and some of those foundations have been cracked for decades. But you keep living on top, because it's what you've always done. Because descending is scary, because what if you discover you need to rebuild everything? When you start asking these questions, something uncomfortable happens. You realize most of your certainties have no foundation of their own. They're supported by other certainties, which are supported by others, which are supported by nothing, or by someone who also never questioned. It's like those buildings that collapse, not from lack of structure, but because the structure was built on top of another structure that was built on top of unfulfilled promises. And when the first layer gives way, everything crumbles. You believe you need to be successful. Why? Because success is important. Why? Because they told you it was. Who told you? People who also heard it from other people. And what was those people's definition of success? Money, status, recognition? And do these things really matter to you? Or do you just think they matter because you never considered another possibility? Look, I'm not saying success doesn't matter. I'm saying maybe you never defined what success means to you. You just inherited a definition, and you've been chasing it for 20 years without ever stopping to ask, is this mine? Thoth recorded that humans live in layers. The visible layer is what you do. The layer below is what you think. And beneath that, invisible to most, is what you assumed as truth without realizing you were assuming. These invisible assumptions control everything. They decide what you don't even consider possible. They filter what you see. They determine what you feel. And you don't even know they're there, because they were installed before you learned language, before you knew I existed. Think about a baby. It cries. Sometimes someone comes. Sometimes nobody comes. It doesn't think I'm being neglected. It has no concept for that. But something is being registered. A silent equation is being formed. I need plus nobody comes. I don't matter. And that equation, it will operate for the rest of their life. It will determine how they seek love, how they tolerate loneliness, how they interpret rejection, all based on patterns that were recorded before language, before conscious memory, before any possibility of choice. And here's where it gets scary. These deep layers don't respond to logic. You can rationally know you're loved. But if the deep layer was programmed with, "You're not enough," no amount of external love will convince. Because the problem isn't in the present. It's the unresolved past operating as present. And here's the mirror nobody wants to look at. If you remove these inherited layers, what remains might be very little or nothing. And that terrifies. Because the illusion of having a solid identity is more comfortable than the truth that you're largely a collage of borrowed fragments. Pause. Breathe deeply. Now do this exercise with me. Mentally list 3 characteristics you consider essentially yours. Your sense of humor, your work ethic, your way of loving. Now trace each one to its origin. Your sense of humor. Did you learn that making jokes relieved tension at home? Your work ethic. Did someone tell you being productive meant being valuable? Your way of loving. Do you replicate the model you saw or avoid the model you suffered? What if each of these characteristics you call who I am is actually a survival strategy you develop to navigate a specific environment? And if you stop being in that environment, do these characteristics still make sense? Or do you just keep carrying them because you don't know who you'd be without them? But wait, there's an inversion here. The descent isn't to destroy, it's to see. And seeing isn't the same as dissolving. When you realize a belief isn't yours, you don't need to rip it out violently. You just need to stop defending it as if it were. And something curious happens when you do this. The belief can remain, but now it's a tool, not an identity. You can use it when it's useful, and set it aside when it's not, without drama, without existential crisis, just clarity. Concrete example. You've always believed asking for help is weakness. Where did that come from? From a father who never asked for help and collapsed alone? From a culture that values self-sufficiency above all? When you recognize you didn't choose that belief, something shifts. You don't need to become someone who asks for help all the time, but you can ask when you need to, without carrying the old guilt, without feeling like you're betraying who you are, because now you know this was never who you were. It was just a rule someone installed. Thoth called this freeing the prisoner who didn't know they were imprisoned. There are no visible chains, no jailer, just the belief that this is how things are. And when you realize it doesn't have to be that way, something inside you relaxes. Not because you changed the world, but because you stopped carrying a weight that was never yours. Now think about how many of your daily worries are actually yours. How many would you have if you'd been born in another place, another family, another era? How many of your fears would exist? How many of your goals would still make sense? And the honest answer, if you really look, is almost none. You worry about what people think. But which people? The ones who taught you that external opinion defines value. If you'd grown up in a culture that values contemplative isolation, would you still care about likes? You're afraid of not being enough. But enough for whom? For the standard they showed you when you were 7 and couldn't question. You want financial security. But why? Because they told you that without money you're nothing. Or because you really want freedom and confused freedom with bank account because that's what they showed you. Most of what you carry is context. It's conditioning. It's emotional inheritance from people who also didn't know they were passing it to you. And you can spend the rest of your life carrying it. Or you can, for a moment, put it all on the ground and ask, what here actually weighs? And what did I just believe, Wade, because they told me? There's a Taoist text that says something similar in another way. The sage doesn't carry the past. Not because they forgot, but because they realized the past isn't a real thing, it's an interpretation, and interpretations can be rewritten, not to deny what happened, but to stop living as if what happened is still happening. You were rejected at 15. That happened. But the story you told about it, the conclusion you drew, I'm not desirable, that part didn't happen. That part was added. By you, based on what you already believed about yourself. Based on what they taught you about rejection. And since then you've been carrying the rejection and the interpretation as if they were the same thing. But they're not. One happened, the other you invented, and it's been destroying you for 20 years. And here's the freedom. You can keep the memory and change the interpretation. Not falsify it, not pretend it didn't hurt, but realize that I'm not desirable was a conclusion a 15-year-old drew with the mental tools they had. And you're not that child anymore. You don't need to keep operating with their conclusions. And here's where it gets really interesting. When you stop repeating what was placed in you, something new can emerge. Not something you create, but something that was always there waiting for you to make space. Thoth called this the unmoved that moves. There's something in you that isn't constructed, that isn't inherited, that isn't shaped by anything external, and that something only appears when you stop pretending the inherited things are you. Think of a room full of old furniture. You can't see the space, only the objects. And when someone asks, how big is the room? You can't answer, because you've never seen the empty space. Only what was occupying the space. And you assume the room is the furniture, but the furniture isn't the room, they're just things in the room. And when you remove one, and another, something appears, not something new. Something that was always there, the space, the room itself. You are the room, not the furniture, but you spent your life believing you were the inherited furnishings. But here's the paradox. You don't find this real you by searching. Because searching is already a conditioned movement. You were taught to search, to seek, to conquer. And those impulses? They were also placed in you. So what remains? Stop searching and see what's here when you're not doing anything to be someone. This sounds passive, but it's the opposite. It's the most active thing you can do. Stop feeding what isn't yours and let what is simply show itself. Without effort, without technique, without protocol, just attention. Attention to what arises when you're not busy being who they told you should be. Here's a simple test. Be alone for an hour. No screen, no book, no music, nothing to do. Just you and empty space. And observe what appears. The first 20 minutes, pure discomfort. Because you're used to being busy, to being productive, to consuming something. But after 20 minutes, if you don't flee, something shifts. The automatic thoughts start losing strength. The inherited voices get quieter. And something subtle appears. Not dramatic, not enlightened, just presence. The awareness that you're here. Without needing to be anything specific. Without needing to prove anything. Without needing to carry anything. Just being. Have you noticed you have thoughts that appear from nowhere? That you didn't summon? That you didn't request? That just appear? Most people assume these thoughts are theirs. But Thoth asked, if you didn't create them, if they just arise, where do they come from? And the answer isn't mystical, it's structural. They come from the mental database that was installed in you during the first years of life. Every judgment you heard, every reaction you saw, every pattern that was reinforced, all of it is there, running in the background, generating thoughts you assume are yours. But what if they're not? What if you're more like a radio picking up frequencies than an original source of signal? Think about it. You tune into a station, hear a song. You didn't create the song. You didn't compose it. You didn't sing it. You just picked it up. But if you don't know you're a radio, you can easily believe the song comes from you, that it's your creation, that it defines who you are. And you spend your life defending that station, that frequency, as if it were the only truth. Without ever realizing you could tune into another, or turn it off completely, and exist in silence. And here's the point that closes the cycle. You don't need to create a true self. It's already here. It always has been, but it's not dramatic. It's not special. It's not the hero of your own story. It's just what observes, what perceives, what's present before any identity is constructed. And when you rest there, even for 10 seconds, something happens. The inherited voices keep talking. But you realize you don't need to believe them. You can hear them like you hear a noise in the street. It's happening, but it's not about you. And it doesn't require you to do anything. Concrete example, a thought appears. You're not good enough. Before, you automatically believed it. You felt the pain. You tried to prove otherwise, or you surrendered to depression. But now, when the thought appears, you recognize, this isn't me thinking. This is an old frequency being picked up. And you can observe it, without believing, without reacting, without needing to fix it, just noticing. That pattern again. And something extraordinary happens. The thought loses power, not because you fought against it, but because you stopped feeding it with credulous attention. Thoth didn't offer an escape. He offered a recognition. The recognition that most of what you call my life is actually the life that was passed to me. And realizing this isn't depressing. It's liberating. Because it means you can stop defending something that was never yours. Can stop blaming yourself for not being who they told you you should be. Can stop carrying expectations that were planted in you by people who were also carrying expectations. And when you stop, is what remains isn't emptiness, it's space for something that doesn't need a name, that doesn't need a story, that doesn't need justification, that just is. Did you notice something just now? That discomfort that appears when you consider you might not be who you think you are. That discomfort isn't a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you're close to something true. Because truth doesn't tend to be comfortable. It tends to be naked, without adornments, without comforting stories, without guarantees you'll like what you find. But it's yours. Perhaps the only thing that really is. Pay attention to your body when truth appears. It's not ecstasy. It's not immediate relief. It's a specific tension, a resistance in the chest, a desire to look away, an urgency to do anything else, because truth demands you abandon something, and the brain interprets abandonment as loss, even if it's the loss of something that was hurting you. You've felt this when someone tells you something about yourself that you know is true but don't want to admit, right? That internal contraction, that automatic, no, it's not like that, followed by a strange silence, because something in you recognizes, but another something doesn't want to recognize, because recognizing means changing, and changing means ceasing to be who you constructed, even if who you constructed is destroying you. And maybe the question isn't, who am I without everything that was placed in me? Maybe the question is, why do I need to be someone? Why does the idea of not having a fixed identity terrify so much? Why does the possibility of being different tomorrow from who you are today seem like a threat? Who told you that you need to be consistent? Who convinced you that changing your mind is weakness? And more importantly, do you agree? Or did you just accept it because it was easier than questioning? Here's the real fear. If you're not somebody specific, how will people love you? How will you belong? How will you know what to do? And the honest answer is, you won't know, but you'll discover. In the moment, without a script, without a prefabricated identity to guide you. And that's terrifying. Because you were taught that not having answers is failure, that not knowing who you are indicates weakness. But Thoth observed the opposite. Not knowing who you are is the only honest position. Because who you are changes, every day, every hour, based on what you experience, what you recognize, what you release. You're not a fixed thing, you're a process. And processes don't have identity, they just happen. Thoth observed that humans fear two things, being nobody and being who they really are. And both are the same thing. Because being who you really are means ceasing to be who you constructed to survive. And survival in most cases required you to be acceptable, predictable, understandable. And you were. You molded your personality to fit. You adjusted your reactions not to scare. You learned which parts of you were welcome and which should be hidden. And you called this maturing. But Thoth called it something else, negotiation. You negotiated parts of yourself for safety, for belonging, for peace. And the bill for that negotiation only shows up decades later, When you realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. Brutal example. You always wanted to create art. But you were raised thinking art isn't a serious profession, so you chose something safe, something that made sense, something people respected. And now, 20 years later, you're successful, but empty, because you negotiated what made you alive for something that made you acceptable, and you called it responsibility, but deep down you know it was fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of failing, fear of being who you really were and discovering nobody would approve. And here's the part nobody told you. Even if you failed being yourself, you'd still be freer than succeeding being someone else. But here's the part nobody told you. You can renegotiate, not with the world, with yourself. You can look at what you sacrificed and ask, does this still make sense? Do I still need to be this version of me? Or do I just keep being it because it's what people expect? And what if they don't expect it anymore? Or if they never really expected it? What if this was all a story I told myself to justify why I didn't change? Here's a difficult exercise. List 3 things you've always said you are. I'm organized. I'm rational. I'm independent. Now ask, why do I need to be this? What would happen if I weren't? Who would be disappointed, and do I care? Most of the answers will reveal something disturbing. You're being something for someone who isn't even here anymore. For a parent who died. For an ex who left you. For a version of yourself that stopped existing a decade ago. But you keep maintaining the performance, like an actor in an empty theater, performing for nobody. Because stopping means admitting you wasted time. And admitting that hurts more than continuing to pretend. There's a phrase in Vedanta that says, you are not what you think you are. You are what thinks. And that changes everything. Because if you are the process of thinking, not the content, then inherited thoughts don't define you, they just pass through you. Like clouds passing through sky, the sky doesn't become cloud, it just observes. And you? You're not the thoughts that were placed in you. You're the space where they appear. And that space was never shaped, never conditioned, never inherited. It's always been here, untouched, waiting for you to stop identifying with what passes and start perceiving what remains. You know when you're watching a movie? You get involved, you feel, you root for characters. But you're not the character, you're the one watching, and when the movie ends, you don't disappear with it. You continue, ready to watch another, or to turn off the screen and exist without any story. The inherited thoughts are the movie. You are who watches. And you've confused the two your entire life. You thought you were the protagonist, but you were always the screen. And maybe now you understand why this isn't a technique. It's not something you do, it's something you stop doing. You stop believing you need to be somebody specific. You stop defending ideas just because you've had them for a long time. You stop repeating patterns just because they're familiar. And in the space that creates, something appears. Not something new, something that was always here. But you were too busy being something else to notice. What stops when you stop performing? The need to impress, the urgency to explain, the compulsion to justify, the automatic defense, the fear of silence, the shame of not knowing. And what appears? Curiosity, lightness, options you never considered because they didn't fit the identity you were maintaining. Possibilities that only exist when you're not busy being who you always were. And maybe that's scary. But it's also the only thing you never tried. You tried being better, you tried being more, you tried being different, but you never tried simply not being anything specific. And seeing what happens, the life you're living wasn't fully chosen by you. And that's okay, because now you know. And knowing changes the relationship with what you didn't choose. You don't need to tear everything down and start over. You just need to stop pretending you chose it and see what happens when you admit, this isn't mine. But it's here, and I can decide what to do with it now, not because someone said so, not because it's right, but because you realized you can. And maybe that's the only real choice you ever had, recognizing what wasn't chosen, and from there, beginning to choose, not based on what they told you, but on what you recognize as true when nobody's watching, when there's no audience, when there's no judgment, when it's just you and the question, what do I really want? Not what I should want, not what would make sense to want, but what I, this space of consciousness that observes everything, really want. Long pause. Do you feel something now? That strange tension between relief and fear, between wanting to release everything and wanting to hold tighter. That's recognition happening. It's not comfortable, but it's real, and real is the only thing left when you stop pretending. And maybe you don't know the answer yet, and that's okay, because the question is already the beginning. The question is already the crack in the mold, and cracks let light in. And light shows what was hidden, and what was hidden was always you. Not the constructed version, not the inherited persona, not the role you learned to play, but you. Without name, without story, without need to be understood, just present. If you strip away everything that was placed in you, what really remains? Thoth didn't answer. He let the question echo, because the answer can't be told, only recognized, and only you can recognize it. Nobody can do this for you, not Thoth, not me, not the people who shaped you, only you, when you're ready, or when you can't stand not being anymore.